Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Technology Uncovered on Finextra. I'm joined again by Stephen Curran. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Great. Thank you. So let's just recap. In part one, we talked a little bit about digital identity. We talked about self-sovereign identity and the concepts of that. We spoke about the Sovrin Foundation and a little bit around the blockchain technology and why that's used. In this session, I want to get a little bit more technical. So it's Tech Uncovered. It'd be great to talk a little bit more around some of the concepts behind the blockchain and this concept called an anonCred, right? You mentioned it in our previous conversation.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to talk about anonCreds, zero knowledge proofs or ZKPs, and what do they mean and why they're so important. But before we do that, let's just talk a little bit more about the blockchain. So I know that Sovrin operates the blockchain, or the Sovrin Foundation that stewards itself. One of the things is obviously the uptime. You talked about the resilience, the availability of it. Mainnet, as it has been running for 6 years now.
6 years, yeah.
6 years with 100% uptime. And let's be clarified here, uptime is 24/7, 365. It's not a day off on a Saturday or a Sunday. It's always there.
I mean, the uptime has only been 3 years. So the last outage was 3 years ago. So and as you say, uptime means available for reading and writing 24/7, 365, 366 on leap years, although I don't think we've had a leap year in. Oh yeah, we would have had one leap year in there. So even on leap days, it's up and running. So yes, 100% uptime for the networks.
And that's a great thing, right? Because something like digital identity, even though, well, actually, if I'm pulling information out of the blockchain, it needs to be up. And likewise, when I'm writing things, but to your point around the millions of credentials that you're issued in our previous session, we talked about that.
Yeah.
When it's peer-to-peer verification, if I've cached that key and it's not a revocable identity credential, right?
Yeah.
Even if the blockchain's there or inaccessible or anything, it doesn't really matter.
100%.
There's also work being done to obviously allow these peer-to-peer verifications that are offline, right? They're not connected.
Yeah.
I'm fully aware of a number of pieces of work that have proved that out, right? They're already doing that. So the blockchain isn't even utilized them and it's offline, right?
Exactly. Yes, that's completely possible. So the trick there is, how do you do the peer-to-peer interaction? And so things like Bluetooth and other techniques like that can be done, and then from a ledger perspective, as long as you cache the transactions that you need to verify what goes back and forth, you're good. And in fact, we've even done experiments and verified that even if we're supporting revocation, we can go offline. And as long as the holder has pulled off revocation information that was on the ledger, again, immutable, just grab the ones, the verifier has that same information. Even proof of non-revocation can be done offline. So yes, fully supported offline capabilities.
And that's really interesting, right? So when we talk about uptime, availability, and something that identity will become systemic, a digital identity will become something that banks, financial payments institutions rely on, insurance broker, my corner shop, everybody will be utilizing this in the future. So that peer-to-peer nature, scalability and resilience, absolutely mission critical, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we the operation of Sovrin just demonstrates how this can be done. Like we have nodes that go offline and online and events that occur, but not to the entire network, and that's what matters. We can keep the entire network running for 3 straight years and counting, with 0 write outages, 0 read outages. So
So blockchain itself, not all blockchains are created equal, right? And there's lots of different types of blockchains. Why Sovrin and self-sovereign identity not really based around something like the blockchain used for Bitcoin or any of the other sort of cryptocurrencies? Because they do have elements of identity in it, right? Or wallet addresses. So why does Sovrin use Hyperledger Indy?
very much it goes back to the early days of what was being developed and early ledgers. There really is. It has a number of properties that are very good, and there was technical reasons for choosing it. There's not a real strong, you could use a number of other ones. We definitely didn't want to use. I wasn't involved in the early decisions, but things like we don't want proof of work and the environmental impact of Bitcoin. We don't need a cryptocurrency based. We're not moving assets around, digital assets around. We're not doing, prevention of double spend. We are publishing data. We just want to publish it in a way that is resilient, is immutable, and so those are that's the approach that was chosen. There are a number of other ones, and what we're also trying to do is make sure that we're future proofing the world of verifiable credentials by doing things like making anonCreds work with Indy, which it always has done, but also work with other ledgers, because we do want to make sure that these are lasting years and years and years, not generations, not 2 and 3 year timeframes or months. These have to last for many, many years.
So you mentioned anonCreds. So what are they? Why are they important?
Yeah.
And why are we doing this work so it works with other ledgers too?
Yeah. So anonCreds is a format for verifiable credentials. There are a number of formats and approaches in the world, and anonCreds is one of them. The power of anonCreds is it has a number of features that increase the privacy of the use of the credentials, and I'll talk about a couple of those things. So one is you can minimize the amount of data you share. So when you get a credential and when you show your driver's license, the person reading it gets all of the information. They can see, your eye color and your address and all of those other things. Some forms of verifiable credentials are the same, that you actually get a credential and you present the same credential to the verifier, and they can see all of the information. So anonCreds has selective disclosure. That's important. That allows.
Just to stop you there, but that's obviously a dangerous thing, right? Because even under certain legislation like GDPR, if I'm asking for a credential, it may be presenting me with data that I shouldn't be asking for, I shouldn't be seeing, right? I don't have a business case for that data.
Correct. So selective disclosure allows the verifier to say, I only need these pieces of information, and allows the holder to only provide those pieces of information. Yet all of that information is fully verifiable, just like any other credential. The second piece, and the most famous one, is the predicates. Predicates allow you to prove something without exposing prove something is in the credential without exposing the information. In particular, this is used primarily for dates, but it can be used for any numeric data. And basically with dates, it allows you to say, I am older than 21 based on my birth date that is in the credential, but without sharing the birth date. And birth dates and issue date, expiry date, all sorts of those things in a credential are very much unique identifiers, which I'll get to next. So now I can prove that I'm older than a certain age without sharing my date of birth. And so when I go to a bar, rather than showing my license with all of the information in it, I can just share that I am older than 21. It's just all the bartender needs to know. They need to know from a reliable source that I am older than the age restriction of wherever your jurisdiction is. And so that's the predicate. So that's the next one is correlation, and this is the big one that anonCreds does
massive, right?
Amazingly well. Yeah. Which is
sorry, I was just going to say, Steve, correlation, I think, is one of the big areas where when the people talk about identity, they don't get that correlation is leakage, right? It's actually leaking my personal identifiable data, and it's what hackers want to do. A hacker, a cyber criminal, wants to steal Stephen Curran's identity. I want to correlate as much information around you to be able to do that, right? So correlation is a great point that we need to talk through.
That's that's a good use case or a good issue with correlation. But the other big issue with correlation is that allows tracking. And so what we're trying to do is reduce or whatever we can do to reduce the amount of tracking done on you on the internet. That you present a credential to one verifier, and then you present another credential, you present that credential with another verifier, and they can correlate you and share information about you, build up a profile of you, and exploit that data. That's the big thing we want to avoid with correlation. So with anonCreds, the act of presenting a credential provides no correlatable information about you. There may be, in the data you present, there may be correlatable data about you, but the act of presenting a credential does not provide the verifier with any correlatable data, even correlatable data if you present it twice. You always generate, anonCreds always generates a new presentation based on the credential, but derived from the credential. So you're not actually sharing the credential itself, and so you're not sharing the unique data within that. And anything like a cryptographic signature is normally a unique identifier. Like if you share a piece of data with a signature on it, that signature is the same every time. With anonCreds, what you're doing is you're deriving a presentation specific one that is unique for that presentation. It's still verifiable back to the source, but to the issued data and the issuer, but it is a unique value that provides no correlation.
And that's a proof, right? We term those things proofs.
Yes, those are proofs. And then the final piece is one of the things that anonCreds that other verifiable credential formats don't do is the idea that the credential was issued to you and you are presenting a proof to a verifier, and that there's a tie between who the credential was issued to and who is presenting the credential. So for example, the W3C verifiable credential model only says the credential was issued by a certain issuer and the data was not tampered with. And anonCreds adds to that, and there is a way to show that it was issued to the person that is presenting, or is issued to a value that is known to the person presenting it. And that's a key thing. So if you're presenting a government ID, it's awfully good to know that it's your government ID that you're presenting. And yet the default models or some of the other verifiable credential models don't have that concept built into it. So the holder can be anybody, essentially. And a verifier has to do something else, and it's not defined what something else is to figure out that, oh, it's Andrew that's presenting this. And that's a huge thing in my mind, is the fact that the issuer explicitly says, oh, I'm issuing this to Andrew, and the verifier can say, oh, yes, it's coming from Andrew, that it's coming from that the person who's presenting it is the same one. And yet this is done without a correlatable identifier. And again, that's the magic of anonCreds, is the issuer is identifying you as it issues the credential, but you don't, you're proving you know that identifier that's being used, but you're not sharing that identifier. And that leads to, let me go to one more thing, which is a huge one, which means that by using verifiable credentials that are anonCreds, a government is not creating for you a new identifier. And that's a big deal. Identifiers are from governments, have legal requirements, have tracking implications, have privacy implications. So if by transitioning a government to use a national ID, a digital ID, and using verifiable credentials for that, if that credential is correlatable, the government is essentially creating a brand new identity number for you. And that's bad. That's difficult. That creates all sorts of challenges. And that's what we want to avoid.
And that comes down to the SSI model, right? I think some people think about verifiable credentials, and there's lots of publicity, lots of misinformation, there's lots of content on the web, and it's hard sometimes to shift through what's valued there, right? I think anonCreds, things like zero knowledge proofs, and everything you've just talked about regarding correlation, the security of it, and critically, governments not reissuing new types of identifiers to you. These are things that are actually now very mature within the Sovrin Foundation and the way that works, right? Whereas I think digital identity is now at a bit of a crossroads. And the problem is when people start talking about this, and governments and politicians and policymakers are starting to look at identity models, they're only getting 50, 60, 70% at best of the story around SSI, because someone's pushing, oh, it's a W3C credential or something like that. Do you agree that actually anonCreds should be the default as opposed to something like a W3C standard credential, which everybody automatically thinks that should be the default?
Yeah. I think the attributes of anonCreds and what it brings should be carefully considered when addressing it. And it should be put as kind of a standard and say, okay, this credential system that's being proposed, what is it? What attributes does it have, and how does that relate to what anonCreds have? And therefore, is that okay? Are those compromises sufficient? Okay with us? I think if you ever ask a privacy commissioner a question like that, they're always going to answer, nope. We don't want to be doing these things that don't. If we could have these features, and you're saying, oh, it's good enough to go with these other features, I think any privacy commissioner, any person in government, or anyone that wants these principles will say, no, that's not good enough. We need to be more focused on this. So should it be the default? I think so, and that's what we keep pushing. There are other options, and there's other things that are easier, but those are part of the compromises. It's similar to the that blockchain question. Well, we could share those public keys in other ways, but then we lose these other features. We lose the immutability, or we lose the resiliency, or something like that. So those are the trade-offs that you come with. And so when people come into SSI and come into digital identity, oh, well, it would be so much easier if we just did it this way. But what do you lose when you compromise on those things? And that's what always has to be kept in mind. So I think anonCreds is kind of the gold standard of, here's what we could do with privacy. If we decide to go with something else, what are we losing?
We've got to be in the real world, right? anonCreds and the infrastructure that's been put together by Sovrin Foundation and the SSI model, it's been hard, and as you just said, it's been a number of years in the making, right? It's not happened overnight. And there's always organizations that want to push something a little bit quicker because they've got investors, they've got shareholders, they need revenues, everything else. We understand. But to my mind, digital identity is one of those things that you cannot make a compromise on. And there's a number of reasons behind that, right? But firstly, there's me as an end user, just me as an end user. If I'm not technical minded, right, I'm thinking about solutions. I'm thinking, oh, I just want to use it to open a bank account, or I want to use it to access, I don't know, a Facebook type site or social media. And then there'll be an argument made that, those sort of users don't care about what they're disclosing. Well, actually, if they're educated enough, they start to understand that actually I do care, right? And if I understand the difference between a W3C credential and an anonCred, I'm going to opt for an anonCred, right? Because I'd like to have the options of whether or not my data is shared or trackable, or I'm disclosing things, as opposed to it's just part of the solution. The problem with that is obviously there's a massive educational piece, right?
There is.
And this is when I think things like governments need to step in and say things that actually these identity solutions have to hit this bar. And it's maybe not even governments, it could be even supranationals on top of that, right? They need to go and set the bar there. Because sadly, I mean, you and I live in the Western world, so to speak. There's various, and actually you could argue even our own governments sometimes abuse identity, right? You don't know what digital identity could be used for in a negative way. So we must protect security and privacy at all times, right? And there's lots of examples of where that's abused, and people look to other countries. But do you think that's actually a real concern with SSI, or do you think SSI is actually helping alleviate some of those identity concerns, or should be helping to alleviate them?
That's a great question. that is the goal, and that's what we're trying to do. And I have the privilege of being able to work for an entity, an organization, actually two organizations, both Sovrin and BC Gov, that's purpose is to try to, that's goal is to try to enable the highest security possible, the highest privacy possible, and the prevention of abuse. So that in my mind is always the focus. But the other side to look at it is these things that we're doing with verifiable credentials, with SSI, are happening already, no matter what. When you are showing a picture of your driver's license and showing your face, because we don't have actual privacy verifiable solutions in the digital world yet. You are rental car companies are taking a photocopy of your passport and collecting all of that information. They're requiring you to overwrite data, over share data, so that they can correlate everything you provide, just to make sure that it's unlikely that you forged all these documents. That's what we're, these things have to happen. There more and more have to happen online. So it's more a question of, how do we get things out there that are, as you say, secure, privacy preserving, and hopefully not subject to abuse, and that abuse is much harder to do. That we're going out of our way to prevent that.
Stephen, we could talk for hours, obviously, and we may end up having a third session at some point in the future. For the people who have been really interested in this, and there will be a lot of people who are new to self-sovereign identity, definitely new to Sovrin itself. Where can they read up a little bit more? What's a good source? How do they get started?
Yeah.
Where would you point them?
The two places, Sovrin.org for the Sovrin Foundation, which has a lot of generalized information on these things, plus specific on Sovrin, but the principles, for example, of SSI and things like that. And then
that's Sovrin, right?
RIN.org.
Sovrin.
Yes, you're going to put notes in this, right?
Yeah.
Hyperledger.org is a good place to go, and hyperledger.org has 3 projects that are open source projects about identity: Hyperledger Indy, Hyperledger Aries, and anonCreds, Hyperledger and anonCreds. So those are good places. Off the bat, those are the ones that I can think of.
And what about so people may have heard the concept of a DID, right? A DID. Is there anywhere where they can read about that, which is a decentralized identity? But
certainly the W3C has, if you look up DID specification or DID core specification, you're going to find the DID spec. That really is diving deep technically, and isn't going to give you that business background that you're going to need, that why. It'll give you the what and precise detail. So I would go more looking at background information to start with, if you're beginning your journey into that. If you already know what a DID is and you want to know the details of it, then you go look at the spec. But that's diving deep.
That's diving in. So Stephen, any last thoughts? And if somebody wants to find you on LinkedIn or see a profile of you in Sovrin, where do they go? Or are you Twitter? Still.
If you look up SW Curran, SWCURRAN, that is what I use a lot. So I'm correlatable. It's something I didn't realize was a bad thing until I long addicted to that and had created so many identifiers. So that's the main place to look for me. I'm very much involved in the Hyperledger community. So the Discord there, I'm frequently there. I have a couple of courses on edX that I've done for the Linux Foundation on an intro to SSI and blockchain and the Hyperledger identity projects, and then more of a developer course. So all of those places are where I can be found.
Lovely. Well, Stephen, thanks again for joining me for these 2 sessions. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I hope that everybody who's watched this has got a better understanding of self-sovereign identity and a better understanding of the importance of privacy, security and the identity models that we think about going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. This was it's a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks again. Cheers, Stephen. Bye.
Bye.